Are you sure about this?
I whispered to Max. He was my best friend, but sometimes his ideas were a little crazy, like taking a spooky train ride on Halloween night, and not just any train ride.
Don't be such a scaredy cat, Tommy. It'll be fun.
He adjusted his pirate hat and grinned at our other best friend, Lily. She was dressed as a vampire with fake blood dripping from her fangs.
I think it sounds kind of exciting.
The train whistle blew, a long, mournful sound that echoed through the station. I felt a shiver run down my spine. This was a mistake. I knew it. The train, all decked out in Halloween decorations, was about to leave New York City and head into the dark, mysterious mountains. The train lurched forward and we were off. The rhythmic clanking of the wheels on the tracks was oddly comforting, a steady beat that seemed to promise adventure. I watched as the city lights faded behind us, replaced by the looming shadows of the mountains. The transition from the bustling city to the quiet, imposing mountains was almost surreal. The train was filled with other kids in costumes, laughing and throwing candy. It was Halloween night and the excitement was palpable. The air was filled with the sweet scent of candy and the sound of giggles. But all I could think about was what might be waiting for us in those dark woods. The trees seemed to whisper secrets, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Max and Lily, of course, were having a blast. They were completely absorbed in their own world, oblivious to the eerie surroundings. They were already comparing candy hauls and telling each other spooky stories. Their laughter was infectious, a bright spot in the otherwise dark and foreboding night. I tried to join in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Something in the shadows, every rustle of leaves, every creak of the train seemed to amplify my unease. As the train climbed higher, the air grew colder. The windows fogged up and I could see my breath in the dim light. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and tried to ignore the feeling of unease that was growing in my stomach. The cold seemed to seep into my bones, making me shiver. The train rattled and shook as if it were struggling to make its way up the steep mountain pass. Each jolt felt like a reminder of the unknown that lay ahead, a journey into the heart of the mountains. After what felt like hours, the train finally screeched to a halt. We had arrived at our destination, the abandoned ghost town of Whispering Pines. It was even creepier than I imagined. The town was shrouded in mist, and the buildings were little more than crumbling ruins. Broken windows stared out at us like empty eyes. I could almost hear the whispers of the ghosts that were said to haunt this place.
This is awesome!
Max exclaimed, already racing towards the nearest dilapidated building. Lily followed close behind, her vampire cape billowing out behind her. I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and followed them. I didn't want to be left alone. We spent the next hour exploring the ghost town, our footsteps echoing through the empty streets. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and every creak and rustle seemed amplified in the eerie silence. The houses were empty except for a few cobwebs and the occasional scurrying rat. Each house told a story of a time long past, with broken windows and doors hanging off their hinges. We found an old saloon, its swinging doors creaking in the wind as if whispering secrets of the Wild West. The bar inside was covered in a thick layer of dust, and old bottles lined the shelves, and a general store with dusty shelves and a rusty cash register. The shelves were still stocked with ancient, faded goods, giving us a glimpse into the daily lives of the town's former residents. But the coolest thing we found was an old abandoned locomotive. It stood majestically, a relic of a bygone era, its once powerful engine now silent and still. It was even older than the one we had arrived on, a true testament to the passage of time. Its iron wheels frozen in time, covered in rust and grime, they hadn't moved in decades. The headlamp was smashed, and the paint was peeled, revealing the bare metal underneath. It was a ghost of its former self, yet still held a certain charm. But I could still imagine it thundering down the tracks, its powerful engine roaring to life, and the ground shaking beneath its weight. Its steam whistle echoing through the mountains, a sound that once signaled adventure and possibility.
Think it still runs? Max's voice broke the silence, filled with curiosity and excitement.
Max asked, his eyes gleaming with mischief. He always had a knack for finding trouble, and this time was no different. Before I could stop him, he had climbed up into the engineer's cab, his small hands gripping the controls as if he could bring the old engine back to life. Lily and I exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what Max might do next. This was Max, after all. He had a reputation for turning the simplest situations into grand adventures. Trouble seemed to follow him wherever he went, and today was no exception. We held our breath, waiting to see what would happen next.
We were heading back to the train station, our bags filled with Halloween candy, when it happened.
There was a deafening screech of metal on metal, and the ground lurched beneath our feet.
What was that?
Maya screamed, her eyes wide with fear.
I knew before I saw it. The train, it had derailed. We were stranded.
Panic surged through me. We were miles from anywhere, and night was falling fast. The temperature was dropping, and the wind howled through the trees like a hungry wolf. We had to get help. But how?
We raced towards the front of the train, our hearts pounding in our chests.
The scene that greeted us was chaos. The engine was off the tracks, tilted at a dangerous angle. Steam hissed from a ruptured pipe, filling the air with a thick white cloud. The other passengers, most of them kids in costumes, were starting to panic. Some were crying, others were shouting for their parents. The conductors, dressed as zombies and skeletons, were trying to maintain order. But it was clear they were out of their element.
We have to get out of here. We need to find help.
But how? We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dark woods, and something told me we weren't alone.
We stumbled through the dark woods, the twisted branches reaching out for us like skeletal fingers. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Strange shapes seemed to move in the shadows, and I could have sworn I heard whispers following us.
Did you see that?
Maya whispered, clutching my arm. I nodded, too terrified to speak. I had seen it too, a flickering light bobbing in the distance, and then I saw them. Dozens of them, pumpkin ghosts. They were floating among the trees, their carved faces glowing an eerie orange in the darkness. Some grinned menacingly, while others wore expressions of sorrow and despair. They were the spirits of Halloween, and they were not friendly.
Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, we stumbled upon a clearing, and in the center of that clearing stood a boy.
He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, but there was something about him that sent shivers down my spine.
He wore overalls and a torn flannel shirt, and his face was pale and gaunt. But it was his eyes that really unnerved me. They were as dark and cold as the grave.
And in his hands he held an axe. A big one. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling.
The boy didn't answer. He just stared at us, his eyes boring into mine. And then, slowly, he raised the axe. I braced myself for the worst. Just when I thought the ghostly boy with the axe was going to attack, a deafening roar echoed through the forest. The ground trembled and the trees swayed violently.
The boy lowered his axe, his gaze shifting to something behind us. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest.
And then I saw it. Rising above the trees, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the moonlit sky, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen before.
It was tall and lanky, with long, spindly arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. But it was its head that was truly terrifying. It had no face, just two enormous sirens, their metal grills twisted and contorted into a grotesque parody of a human scream.
Siren head.
The ghostly boy, who I now realized was probably not trying to hurt us but warn us, pointed his axe towards Siren Head. His eyes, though hollow and eerie, seemed to convey a sense of urgency and desperation. It was as if he was trying to communicate something crucial, something that could change the course of our fate. To my surprise, the terrifying creature lowered its head and let out a series of ear-splitting blasts from its sirens. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the forest and sending chills down my spine. But there was something different about these blasts.
But these weren't the terrifying screams I was expecting. These were different. They had a pattern, a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. It was as if the creature was trying to communicate with us in a language we could understand. They were rhythmic, almost musical. The sound waves danced in the air, creating an eerie yet mesmerizing visual. It was a strange and surreal experience, one that I couldn't quite comprehend at first.
And then it hit me. It was Morse code. He's trying to help. The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. The creature, despite its terrifying appearance, was trying to communicate with us, to guide us. Maya shouted, her voice barely audible above the din. "He's saying he can help us move the train!" Her words were a beacon of hope in the chaos, a lifeline that we desperately clung to. "He's saying he can help us move the train!" The message was clear now, and we knew what we had to do. We had to trust the creature despite our fears and doubts.
And that's exactly what happened. In the eerie silence of the night, amidst the dark and foreboding forest, we witnessed something extraordinary. With a strength that defied its skeletal frame, Siren Head used its long arms to lift the derailed train car back onto the tracks. The sight was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a testament to the creature's incredible power. The ghostly boy watched silently, his axe resting on his shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but there was a sense of calm and resolution in his stance. It was as if he knew that everything was going to be all right. With the train back on track, we all piled back in. The conductors, still looking a little shaken, thanked the ghostly boy and even tried to offer him some candy.
He just shook his head and disappeared into the woods, Siren Head following close behind.
As the train pulled away from the ghost town of Whispering Pines, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude for the terrifying creatures who had helped us. They might have been spooky, but they weren't evil. In fact, they had saved our lives.
And as the train sped through the night, carrying us safely back to New York City, I realized that sometimes even the scariest monsters can be our friends. Or at least they can be helpful in a pinch.